Hello and welcome to Views on News. I am Jawad Tehami. On one side, where the entire globe wants the Israeli atrocities to come to a halt against the innocent Palestinians in Gaza, which constitute the war crime and crime against humanity, Israeli regime on the other side seems to be in a very different frame of mind. In fact, in a very opposite frame of mind, because rather than rectifying and giving heed to the global demand and sentiment of an immediate ceasefire over there, it has entered into a spat now with whom? With the United Nations officials. Now, its envoy at the UN also calling for the Secretary General to resign, and also the Israeli officials have threatened of not issuing visas to the UN officials also. Now, why this fury against the United Nations Secretary General on the part of the Israeli officials? The United Nations Secretary General has actually in fact criticized Israel for its atrocities it is perpetrating against the innocent people in Gaza. What the Secretary General exactly said, let me quote one of those very important statements which he made when he was opening a very important United Nations Security Council session regarding discussion of this particular conflict that is underway between Palestine and Israel. The United Nations Secretary General said it is important to recognize that attacks by Hamas did not happen in a vacuum. The Palestinian people have been subjected to 50 years of suffering. And this is exactly the statement that actually brought in all the fury and that condemnation from the Israeli officials. Not only this, the United Nations Secretary General at the same time called upon the Palestinian resistance group Hamas to release all those hostages it took after its surprise incursion against Israel on 7th of October. Meanwhile, we have seen Qatar's Prime Minister saying there was some sort of progress on the hostage negotiations. Hamas has so far released 4 out of all those hostages. Now, the United Nations Security Council, as I've already mentioned, it opened the first ever open debate regarding the discussing this particular conflict. Earlier we had seen there were 2 sessions regarding this conflict that happened at the United Nations Security Council, but so far it has failed to deliver any sort of a resolution to the situation that is unfolding in Gaza. We had earlier seen Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu warning of a ground invasion and once again reiterating his earlier stance to wipe out Hamas completely. Now some media reports say that Lebanon's Hezbollah's head has met Palestinian groups Hamas and Islamic Jihad's leaders to discuss as to what this alliance can collectively do for an all-out victory against Israel. Likewise, when we talk about Pakistan's position, Pakistan at the United Nations has said struggle against foreign occupation cannot be equated with terrorism. We'll be taking all these aspects for discussion in today's show. And for that, we are honored to have been joined in the studio by Mr. Naveed Aman Khan. He is senior analyst. Mr. Naveed, thank you very much for your time for being with us on the show tonight. Really appreciate that. In the studio at the same time, we are being joined by Air Vice Marshal, retired Ijaz Malik, senior analyst. Mr. Malik, thank you very much for your time. Also for being with us on the show tonight. Really appreciate that. On Skype at the same time, we are being joined from the UK by Mr. Jauhar Saleem. He is former Foreign Secretary of Pakistan. Mr. Jawad, thank you very much for your time, also for being with us on Views on News tonight. Really appreciate that. If both of you gentlemen allow me, let me begin the discussion with Mr. Jauhar Saleem. Mr. Jauhar Saleem, it makes me, it's quite difficult for me. I don't know where to actually start from. There are so many developments on this particular front when it comes to Israeli authorities' approach, especially when they have entered into a spat with the United Nations officials, especially calling for a resignation of the United Nations Secretary General himself. Or should I be starting from the failure of the United Nations Security Council as far as resolution of this conflict is concerned? Or should I be starting from the dire humanitarian situation that is unfolding for the innocent people of Gaza? especially when we talk about the UN Agency for Palestinian Refugees saying that 600,000 IDPs are sheltering in 150 facilities of this particular agency, and many people are sleeping in the streets, and its centers are over their capacities. So where would you like to start it from? Let's begin with the Israeli authorities spat with the United Nations Secretary General himself. What kind of a behavior and approach when you evaluate of the Israeli authorities is regarding their behavior towards the United Nations Secretary General?
Thank you. All these three aspects that you've mentioned, they're very important. The plight of Palestinians right now, as we witness, it's a human catastrophe of epic proportions, which is in process. And the world is watching. But for most part, the world is just watching and not being able to do much. You have mentioned the United Nations. What is happening in the United Nations is not unexpected. In fact, in my previous comments that I made in this way program and other programs, I had hinted that Israelis, they regard United Nations as united nothing. So they have never paid any heed to what happens in the United Nations. Although United Nations, as we know, has very effective mechanisms in terms of United Security Council resolutions, that could be a binding resolution from UNSC, could have an important role to play in this situation. The problem, as we know, is that any such resolutions, and such resolutions have been offered in this particular instance as well by Russia, for instance, by Brazil, but they have been vetoed by the US, which was again very expected. The plight of Palestinians that we see now in an area of about 140 square miles, there are 2 million of them. So it's one of the most densely populated areas in the world. And the indiscriminate bombing that we all watch the images on the TVs or our screens, it's causing thousands of deaths. As per Palestinian sources, over 5,000 people have been so far martyred and killed. Now that contrasts with the 1,400 Israelis that were killed by Hamas in the initial attacks on the 7th of October. Unfortunately, what we see now in the world is that the perceptions are very different. On the one hand, I've seen in the West the perception that what Hamas did warranted or merited an unprecedented reaction and response from Israel. So that is why in the West, although there has been condemnation of this indiscriminate bombing, the humanitarian situation that we witness in Gaza today, no water, no electricity, no fuel, and hospitals totally paralyzed, a human tragedy unfolding there. But at the same time, they talk about what happened on the 7th October. On the other hand, in the Muslim world, we see that, as the images appear on the screens every day, the emotions are naturally affected. Now, you had hinted at this Hezbollah and Islamic Jihad and Hamas coming up with a common front. That was in the very beginning as well, as we would recall. Hezbollah had intervened in, there was some low intensity sort of skirmishes, at least to the extent of shelling and rockets being fired. But then that kind of stopped. Hezbollah did not really, it did not really contribute to what Hamas was doing in any way, which was in some ways good, because the conflict would have widened otherwise. If Hezbollah would have launched a full intensity attack in terms of shelling or rockets, that would have really widened the conflict and then would have drawn other countries in the conflict. Unfortunately, on the one hand, United Nations cannot do much, as we see, and in the coming days as well, when we see the languages, when we see the language of the various drafts being presented, we see now one draft which is being circulated by the Americans. And the Russians have made it clear that they will oppose that. And in that draft, they don't talk about ceasefire, they talk about a humanitarian pause, but before that, they want all the hostages to be released. So the countries have objections on that also, including some countries in the Middle East, which are generally considered as US allies. So there's not much possibility of success of that draft either. While this is likely to, this issue is likely to drag within the UN without a decisive outcome in terms of a binding resolution. On the ground, what we see is Netanyahu, who has an image as a tough leader of Israel, and now he's running what he calls a war cabinet, a national government, and he's at the head of that. And it suits his political survival because he is beleaguered. He had problems before this Hamas attack on the 7th October within Israel. He was in a difficult situation. On top of that, this attack, which showed a total intelligence failure and Netanyahu's inability to stop such a massive attack, it further deteriorated his popularity. But now he sees a chance, he now sees an opportunity to rehabilitate himself. And it really suits him to prolong this, what he calls a war. And he has already said that it's going to be a long war. So what we anticipate is that Israelis, after this shock and awe type of an operation that they're doing, this indiscriminate bombing, which is killing thousands of Palestinians and has really created a situation which is totally unacceptable by any international human standards. But the worst part is yet to come, because following this, they plan to have a ground invasion and they plan to reoccupy Gaza, because it is very clear from all the indications that we get that Israel has decided that Hamas has to go. They don't want to just destroy Hamas's military capability. They now would want to ensure that Hamas can never again have any part in the ruling of that autonomous region. And perhaps Israelis plan to do away with all the autonomy that Gaza enjoyed. In fact, some analysts even believe that perhaps Israel would, while reoccupying Gaza, it might even think of sort of having settlements there.
Mr. Jauhar, these last 2 points very pertinently mentioned by you regarding Benjamin Netanyahu trying to prolong this particular episode to get that favorable perception among the Israelis, and also they plan to have a ground invasion. I'll come back to you to take your deeper understanding of these two very interconnected points. Let me just proceed with the discussion. Let me bring in Mr. Naveed into the discussion also. Mr. Naveed, now when we talk about the kind of statements that have been given by UN Secretary General at the opening of this very important United Nations Security Council session to discuss this conflict, I would like to quote him once again, and I just want you to elaborate on it. What does that particularly signify when it says that it is important to recognize that the attacks by Hamas did not happen in a vacuum? The Palestinian people have been subjected to 50 years of suffering.
Yes, it is very important statement by the UN Secretary General. Though it is true that this time Hamas initiated this war, but we have more than 50 years, or we can say 75 years history of Israeli attacks or Israeli pressure on Palestine. That will not go waste. That is the part of the history, and everybody knows what the Israel or Israelis have been doing with the Palestinians in the past. And at this stage, the Secretary General has shown some humanity, and he has shown that America and the American allies or Israeli allies should realize what they are fighting for, and Israel, America, Great Britain, France in particular, they are patting shoulders of Netanyahu. What Netanyahu is doing against Israel, against Palestine. This is not the time they should pat the shoulder of Netanyahu. American president has put fuel to the fire. I mean, his behavior is quite ridiculous. At this stage, he should have intervened and he should have sorted out the matter on diplomatic ground, on political ground, and on humanitarian ground as well. The atrocities are, on terrible conditions, on terrible level. The death toll is rising. Only 700 to 1,000 Palestinians were martyred last day, and the death toll has increased to around 7,000. More than 17 or 18,000 Palestinians are seriously injured. And the most important thing regarding all this is they are suffering from, they are facing that situation where they are not having any medical treatment. Paramedical staff is not available, doctors are not available, the food is not available, milk and water is not available for the innocent children. So the crisis is deepening, and the international community will have to intervene and end this war or this Israeli attack on Palestine at their earliest. Otherwise, we'll see a big, tragedy of today's time.
Right, Mr. Malik, when we talk specifically, going back once again in time, talking specifically about that surprise incursion on part of Hamas against Israel, which majority of people around the world are of the view that actually badly exposed the kind of military and the intelligence and the defense prowess or the strength Israeli regime had. But at the cost of what? We have clearly seen if 1,400 Israelis were killed as a result of that surprise incursion carried out by Hamas, we've seen quite an asymmetry when it comes to death toll, the scale of destruction and damage that has been accrued by the civilians in Gaza. By now, over 5,700 innocent civilians have lost their lives. Don't you think Hamas perhaps didn't calculate the repercussions of the kind of impact and the kind of price the innocent Gazans would have to pay after this so-called surprise incursion?
I would say that probably they should have, had a wholesome 360-degree view of what they were heading for and what they were doing. But what choices did they have, or what have they achieved after giving this, surge to the operations or atrocities? One, that they have symbolically, I would say, broken the myth of the invincible defense of Israel.
So, Mr. Malik, everyone agrees that, okay, that myth has been broken.
Okay.
What onwards?
Secondly,
they didn't have that defense capability in order to protect those innocent people of Gaza. So they haven't been retaliating after that. We haven't seen any big scale retaliation on part of Hamas.
Yes, we have been, ever since this conflict started, I mean, right on your channel, we have been contemplating this thing, that is it a sustainable model? It has had big question marks. But if you see in the larger context, unfortunately, the powers to be who are with Israel, they are playing right in open. You see the optics of President Joe Biden there, or Prime Minister Sunak. He is getting out from a transport aeroplane through ramp. Have you ever seen any countries, even a very small country's president or prime minister would get out of the the front door through cockpit, and he is as if he is trying to give a message that here we are, I have brought a transport load, aircraft loaded for your help. So if Israel enjoys that kind of support, what has been done to the Secretary General, it was not unexpected, because their attitude is that we don't care about United Nations or the world opinion, because the public opinion in the Muslim world as well as in the rest of the world is against Israel, because apart from being a political issue which is 75 years old, or if you even go back in the actual history, it is right from the Balfour Declaration that where the roots of this conflict are. But essentially as of now it is a humanitarian issue. So where is that collective conscious of that modern world, the first world, who always talk about even the animal rights? So what rights are there for these innocent people of the Gaza? So I think anybody who is just keeping silent is indirectly siding with Israel. And I would rather be blunt in saying that the responsibility lies on the countries which are in the region, the Arab Muslims. They have to somehow try to convince. Israel will not be convinced. It is the supporter of Israel's who can bring some relief to
So what sort of some practical immediate measures in that regard you can suggest for the Muslim countries collectively doing on that front? We have seen an extraordinary meeting of the OIC also happening, condemning in strongest possible terms, urging the international community to stop Israel from its atrocities. We have also seen in this very important session of the United Nations Security Council, the Foreign Minister of Jordan, on behalf of the 22 member of the Arab group, also urge the international community to actually reassure 2 billion Muslims around the world to stop Israel from carrying out these atrocities. What practical measures, these statements we have seen coming back and forth, what are the practical measures ahead?
Practical measures are maybe, because in the recent past another issue which is affected directly is the peace process or the appeasement which was going on in and around this region. For example, Saudi Arabia and UAE, their parleys and recognition of Israel. If these two countries along with Qatar, if they come out and openly say that all this process will be stalled and we go back to the position which was a few years back, and we will not go ahead with our planned agenda with the normalization of relationship, it will put a lot of pressure on Israel. But for that they really have to rise above their vested interest to prolong their monarchies and prolong their regimes, and they have to, you see, the world is witness. What happened in Afghanistan, what happened in case of Iran, and what continued to happen in case of North Korea. Any nation which has stood up against the hegemony of America and his cronies, America could do nothing about them. So I think this is the time that Muslim world, the so-called Ummah, should wake up, and they should side with these people who are their brethren.
Right. Mr. Jauhar, what's your understanding? What could be the practical measures on part of the Muslim countries collectively at this point in history, at this critical juncture, to goad the conscience of at least the supporters and the allies, the major Western powers, the allies of Israel, to stop Israel from carrying all these acts?
I have a slightly different perspective on this. One, I think while the emotions in the Muslim world are very high and understandably so, I think it's very important to recall that in many such previous instances, such an outpouring of support has not really mattered. For example, when the US wanted to invade Iraq, there were demonstrations, not in the Muslim world, in London with 1 million people, and in other Western capitals with hundreds and thousands of people. Even that did not really have an impact on the US policy at the time. This is realpolitik, and we have to understand how the international politics works. I think the important thing right now is what the Muslim countries can do, and that is to to basically draw the world's attention, particularly the important powers' attention, to the humanitarian tragedy that is unfolding in Gaza and try to stop that. That is the best that can be done at this point in time. I don't really see that at this point in time any serious quest for or any serious process for resolving the issue, the Palestinian issue itself, can actually take place. This is the time for trying to avoid this human tragedy turning into a massacre of unprecedented proportions. Because a ground invasion from Israel, which would involve, of course, street to street fighting, house to house fighting, that could be devastating. Israel has the brute power. There's no comparison in terms of the military prowess of Israel and Hamas. Right now, what we witness is an asymmetric warfare. In asymmetric warfare, what we normally notice is that the casualty toll is 1:10. That is, the guerrillas or those involved in asymmetric warfare take 10 times more casualties than the organized militaries, as we have seen in Iraq or Afghanistan and many other places. So this is the type of death toll that we could witness in the coming days, and perhaps even greater, because the disparity there is even much greater, and the terrain there is not like the terrain in Afghanistan or Iraq, and it's not really a huge territory. It's just 140 square miles. So that is why I think the Muslim countries right now.
What is the possibility? How much is the likelihood of a ground invasion in the coming days? And if there is a real possibility of ground invasion on the part of the Israeli authorities, why they are waiting till now? Why have they waited till so far? Is there anything that they want to take out of this equation? Perhaps the possibility of getting all those captives released first and then launching that ground invasion? Do you understand that could be that way also?
Yeah, definitely. I think that's a very important aspect. The hostages, those 200, close to 200 hostages, they are playing a very big part in the Israelis delaying the ground offensive. Also, they want to destroy all the Hamas infrastructure that they can without a ground invasion, like whatever they can do from the air. We have seen that in the past being done in other countries as well. And the air superiority, of course, is totally unmasked. Then the third element is that the US has been putting pressure on Israel on delaying the ground offensive. And the US, as we know, has promised a massive aid package, a support package to Israel, which would include, of course, not just defense equipment, but a lot of other things as well. So I think these three elements are the reason that the ground offensive is being delayed. And it would be very important for the Muslim countries, for the Muslim world, to ensure that not only that it's delayed, if somehow they could manage, which quite frankly, would be rather hard to do, that to manage that the ground offensive does not take place. That should be the priority, which seems less likely. So I think the other thing they need to do is to ensure that the support that the people need there in terms of aid, in terms of fuel and water and electricity and medical supplies and the assistance from the UN agencies, that support could be sustained because it was open, but like to a very, very limited extent, and it has been blocked since. So that is very important, I think, one. And number two,
the interjection once again, point well taken. I just want to carry with the discussion from this very point that you've just mentioned, the reason of the delay of the ground invasion on the part of Israel, and what could be the possible outcome or the scenario if that ground invasion happens. Mr. Naveed, your take regarding that. Why there has been delay so far if Israeli authorities really intend to follow that path of launching a ground invasion? Why had been a delay so far? Are they waiting for the entire captives to be released first? and what could be the possible outcome if that is carried out?
Jawad, definitely they are waiting for the captives to come out with themselves. Number one. Number two, they're not in hurry. Israel is not in hurry. They know that they're not going to stop their invasions on Palestine, and they are continuing this. And they know that America and Great Britain, along with France, they are standing with Israel, and they have shown solidarity with Israel. So they're not in hurry. The most important thing in this regard is this: it should be stopped. It should be, hindered by the Muslim world. If Saudi Arabia, UAE, Qatar, Bahrain, Oman intervene or they enhance their diplomatic pressure on America, France, Great Britain, and Israel, because all these countries have their interaction and their relationship
development
with
regarding the release of the hostages. Now, Qatar has mediated in those talks. We have seen Hamas already releasing 4 captives. Now, shouldn't it be had been considered as a goodwill gesture, something to start from? And the Israeli authorities should have reciprocated at least by halting its bombardment against Gaza.
Definitely.
So what else? The Muslim countries are already trying to mediate, even when the release of hostages is concerned. They are giving very strong statements at a very important forum also, including the United Nations Security Council. What else?
The efforts of the Muslim world or the Arab worlds are insufficient. The response of UN is more weighty than the response of OIC and Arab League. The pressure and the efforts should be enhanced by the Muslim and the Arab worlds. They should have. They have not visited America or Israel or France or Great Britain to enhance their pressure and to show their concern and their worry.
So, is there any possibility that Muslim countries could collectively think of imposing an oil embargo?
Definitely, these tactics will work. And this is the way.
How viable this particular?
This is 100% viable. This is very important because
has it been tried already in the history, and do you think it's going to bear the fruits?
It has not been, but it can be at this stage because Palestine is in deep trouble, and you cannot bring that relief to Palestine at this stage unless you impose these tactics or you go for such decisions. They should at least feel that Muslim world or Arab world have some pressures or have some those ways which if they use America, Israel and Great Britain, they will be in pressure or in trouble. So the problem is this: till today the Arab world is not successful in enhancing or in showing that pressure on these countries. Number one. Number two is this: America has asked their nationals to leave Middle East. It shows that this war is not going to end sooner, and America and Israel are planning to enhance this or to develop this war longer, and it will spill over from Palestine to Lebanon to, it has already spilled over to Syria, Lebanon, and if it goes beyond this, it will be a great tragedy. And the moment any other regional country like Iran takes any step, it will be out of control. So better we need to enhance our diplomatic activity, and we need to enhance our political or diplomatic pressure on America, on Britain, and on Israel.
So as you mentioned, if it has got that very thing of escalating beyond the borders of Palestine and Israel and going into a wider region, who is going to be taking responsibility for that wider conflict at the end of the day?
Nobody will take that responsibility, and nobody will ask Israel. I mean, Israel feels that Israel is unquestionable, and nobody can ask what are you doing, and how you have that moral grounds of escalating all this war from Palestine to onward. This behavior should be checked.
Mr. Right. Are you done with your
It's okay,
Please
it's
go
okay,
ahead.
it's okay,
Please complete. Mr. Malik, very quickly, the possibility of that ground invasion, if that scenario happens, as per your understanding, on which side of the two the circumstances and the weight of that equation is going to sway?
Definitely, it will be tilted towards the military might of Israel, because of its per se its asymmetrical warfare. Terrain, as His Excellency the Ambassador mentioned, obviously this terrain is not like Afghanistan, where terrain support the guerrilla warfare, where they could mask their presence in the terrain. But
isn't there an elaborate network of underground tunnels?
Yes, I am coming to that. But as you asked in your previous question, the first and foremost consideration could be the hostages. As long as those hostages are there, they would not go for a massive ground invasion. Secondly, they would go after they are done with through some temporary arrangement, and the kind of government they have and the kind of reputation and past history they have, they are not honor bound to commit and then not backing out from any negotiation after their purpose of retrieval of their hostages is done. They would go for invasion, but they cannot use the terrain is such and the population is so much that probably they would not use that kind of weaponry. Their sole purpose of invasion would be selectively engaging those.
Are they already selectively engaging? Because the kind of reports we are getting, the Director General of Al-Shifa Hospital in Gaza says that he has never seen injuries before like the injuries happening right now, because Israel is using new deadly weapons. So if the Director General of a hospital over there is saying that he has never seen injuries of such sort, so
no,
you see, are they limited in their operations already with indiscriminate and disproportionate bombardment going on?
Actually, Jawad, the operational strategy and tactics, they evolve, they change with the changing scenario every day during a conflict, because at this stage they are trying to create a shock, awe and shock effect. They want to break the will of the Hamas and their supporters' will to fight, and they want to do that. So there is an massive application of air power. But once you come on ground, then they